We're talking with Major Dan Dempsey today, the Canadian aerobatic snowbird team. Dan, could you tell us how many snowbirds the tutors are involved in your formation flying?
Sure. We have a complement of 14 aircraft on our particular squadron. We use 9 in the show, and we normally take 11 on the road with us because our 2 coordinators and narrators also fly snowbird aircraft. So total 11 aircraft, 9 in the show. There are no spare pilots. Our routine is much too complex for spare pilots, so the 9 pilots that we select to fly in the show each year are the only pilots that fly in that show.
And the pilots themselves, how long are they in it for the amount of years?
It's normally a 2-year tour, with the exception of the team leader. And the team leader has to have been on the team before for a 2-year tour in order to come back, so he gets a total of 4 years.
What are some of the places that you demonstrated?
Well, we go all over North America. This year we have 67 shows in 47 different locations. So we cover Canada coast to coast, up into the north from time to time. This particular year we're going down to the United States for 13 shows. As far west as Painfield, Washington, which is just north of Seattle. And as far east as Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach. So we cover the continent.
What are some of the speeds that you fly at during the maneuvers?
Our normal speeds are relatively slow for jet aircraft, between 280 and 340 knots, so roughly 300 to 350, 360 miles per hour.
Can you give us an idea of the names of some of the maneuvers that you do?
Sure. Today, unfortunately, because of the weather, we had to do our low show. But in our normal high show, we start off with a series of loops and rolls from Delta Formation into the Big Arrow to the Concorde Formation. We come around, we do one of our most spectacular maneuvers is something called the Canada Burst, where I bring the all 9 aircraft head on to the crowd and then pull it up and call a split, and all 9 aircraft go 9 different directions. Once we do that, we then split off our 2 solos, and they're the 2 fellows that do the head-on maneuvering towards each other, and they have a number of very dynamic maneuvers. Level rolls, they do a number of maneuvers head-on to the crowd where they use illusion to make it look like they're going through each other, although they're quite far apart actually. But those are very popular maneuvers. And then we always end off with the ever-popular downward bomb burst, where again we've rejoined all 9 aircraft and we split them in the vertical going away from the crowd.
And these are good weather maneuvers?
Those are good weather maneuvers I just described. The show we did today was our low show when the ceiling was too low to do looping maneuvers. So it was basically a flat show with some interspaced with some of the solo head-on maneuvers.
All right, well, thanks very much, Dan. We're talking to Bud Granley at the Red Deer Airshow this afternoon. Bud, tell me, what type of aircraft is it that you fly here for your aerobatics?
For Canadians, it's a Harvard. For American Air Force, it's an AT-6, and for American Navy, which this is an SNJ-4. So it's a Texan or Harvard. They made 22,000 of these airplanes during and after World War II to train virtually almost every allied country in the world. And it prepared the pilots in the military to be ready to fly Spitfires and Mustangs and all the type of fighter airplanes and keep current airplanes.
What horsepower would these have?
This is 600 horsepower with full takeoff power. So it's a 1,340 cubic inches with 600 horsepower.
But I understand that you used to fly off of this base.
This is my last Air Force base. Before I went down to United Airlines in 1964, I left here and drove down to Denver and went to school. But this is my last base, and I was in standard flight here, just a couple hangars up the line, and I've got great recollections about this place.
Why do you have the? Is that the old Golden Hawk emblems? And of course, I can understand Royal Canadian Air Force because that's private.
It is. I have trouble going through customs because I have an American registration number and it's a Canadian airplane coming in, so they're always a little surprised. But I never flew in the Golden Hawks, but I always wanted to, and I was invited down, but I was in trouble on the base at the time for doing something wrong at an air show, so I couldn't get to go down. As it turned out, it was a blessing because I've got a good job and I get to do this still. So I've always had a great fondness for the Golden Hawks, which are a great F-86 aerobatic team. No matter how hard I painted my airplane, I couldn't make it look like an F-86 though.
And how long have you been at this, bud?
Well, I was doing air shows here. I began to do air shows here at Penhold. I was the designated air show pilot, like when we went out to the local areas to do air shows, and so that's really where it started. And that was probably 1960, 61.
And do you come up for these air shows from United Airlines to partake in them during the summer months?
Well, I plan my summer so I can get vacation and kind of hit it real hard for a couple months in the summertime, and then I try to arrange my schedule so I can hit some other air shows. But I'm virtually in the summertime I'm an air show pilot, and then my vacation's over and I go back to my real world.
Now, this aircraft, is that a Mark IV or Mark II, the different marks?
It's an early airplane. It's the 1943 airplane. And it actually retired in 1951, and Canada was still making these airplanes in 57. So it's an early airplane that retired with 2,500 hours on it. And it would be comparable to a Harvard Mark II. Or a T6C is an SNJ4, which is a fairly early model airplane. And probably the reason I'm doing air shows right now with this, well, I do it with a Glasser also, but I would never be without a Harvard. I will always have a Harvard. If I do have some other airplanes, but if I had to sell them all, this would be the last airplane I would sell, because it's done such a good job. You know, Canada was called an airdrome of democracy in World War II, and it does so much more than people think it does. I mean, it's such a much better airplane than a lot of people think it is, and I like to demonstrate it because it does do things that. I'm proud of the airplane, and I'm happy to be able to do some of the things with it that we can kind of do together. That's right. I mean, sometimes, especially when it's cold and crispy here, so many days were going by, and it was a very cold day, and it was just crackling noise, and it's just wonderful. And I have a very great love affair with this airplane. Any World War II airplane, I have a great love affair with.
The black spot, the load, the wing, and back at the tail. Still has a good head of speed, but no power. Watch for the wheels to touch down. When they do, if everything looks right. Gear down, rolling the airplane in the dirty environment. Back on the stick once again, looking for the end of the runway. The touchdown, roll, and touch. Now watch for Bud to come in on the last pass. Over the field where he has demonstrated to his squadron mate so many times as the chief demo pilot back in those days. Gear down, and a little waltz. This is what the students look like before Bud Granley taught them how to fly correctly. What you see prior to that, our students move after Bud. And give them just the years of his expertise. Now you saw Airspray 826 take off. That means we do have a surprise for you. I am keeping that surprise a secret. But remember the name Rich Gibson. Advisor Publications is part of our surprise. Airspray is part of our surprise. And Alberta Eagle Drilling Limited, also part of our surprise. As we are going to make things happen here this afternoon, Bud side-slips the big Harvard in to the airshow runway. We'll be setting down momentarily.
And we're talking to Lieutenant Colonel Bob Stickley at the Red Deer International Air Show. And Bob, could you tell us what some of your functions are?
Well, as the base commander of Penhold, I am the senior active pilot in the area, and my responsibilities, Jim, were to act as the air show air display director, which means that for the military acts, both the Canadian Forces aircraft and the visiting United States Air Force aircraft, I must attend the briefings, the debriefings, and monitor their performance to make sure they're adhering to the basic guidelines for air displays.
You were mentioning that you're also in charge of this base?
Yes, of CFB Penhold, which is, of course, the base that used these runways up to 1965. Now the runways belong to the city, but the base is maintained as part of the number 14 training group in the Canadian Armed Forces Air Command.
You were also mentioning earlier that you used to instruct out of Penhold back in the Air Force days. Can you tell us a little about that?
Actually, I was a student here, and Bud Granley, who you saw fly the Harvard here so beautifully this afternoon, was an instructor when I was a student here back in 1964. And therefore, coming back to Penhold and seeing the Harvard fly again, I feel it's a little bit of a time warp, and a most enjoyable time warp.
Could you tell us, are you directly involved with this, or is it amongst the pilots to decide just what they want to do and the minimum altitudes and so on?
The minimum altitudes and the weather limits are all very, very clear-cut, set down in orders. Any given display, such as the snowbirds perform, or an individual display pilot, such as Captain Lancaster and his F-18, must be designed, approved, practiced, and then flown in front of usually the officer commanding the command, and get the stamp of approval before either the snowbirds or individual acts go to take their shows to the public in various displays about the country.
So you're involved directly with the briefings and the debriefings?
That's correct. I know that the show that, for example, the F-18 display pilot is going to fly has the approval from his superiors. What I'm there for is just to assist him in whatever way I can, and admittedly to monitor him to see that he does adhere to the rules. And of course our air crew are also professional, that it is really a token task, and it was a pleasure to watch a very, very well-flown series of displays this afternoon. Most bases will have an Air Force Day or an open house, or indeed will contribute aircraft. Obviously, major shows such as that at the CNE in Toronto and at Abbotsford do highlight the snowbirds and various other military aircraft. And this year to date, I know that Trenton has had its Air Force Day, Shearwater its Air Force Day, I believe Cold Lake has. So the answer is that every major Air Force base will host an Air Force Day, and some of the performers will be local air crew and aircraft based at that base. Others will be called in for display, either static or flying.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. We're talking to Major Lee Olson this afternoon. Major, could you tell us what function and what military involvement is in the Red Deer Air Show?
Okay, the Red Deer Air Show, of course, goes back a considerable number of years at an air base, or what was an air base, during World War II. We've always had a close liaison with the city ever since we basically gave the runways to them to use as their municipal airport. And one of the things we do is run our Armed Forces Day, which the military is committed to running every day to open our bases to the public, in conjunction with their air show that has been going, I believe, since about 1980 in the present format. And we provide, we join our Armed Forces Day with their air show and provide support in such things as parking, security, and of course bringing our ground displays, our Armed Forces ground displays that we use for Armed Forces Day as part of their air show entertainment. Yeah, my particular function is as a liaison officer to the Civilian Air Show Committee. I'm the only military officer that sits on that committee, and I do some legwork for the committee in lining up some of the military acts and getting some of the military participation in the air show, including American military. And one of my functions during the air show is to be in the tower and to help sort out the timings and some of the weather criteria that apply to the various military acts that fly.
Look at that from straight out of the motion pictures, ladies and gentlemen, it is Batman! Oh, I got a live one here. measured down to him. Now he says next time, he'll listen to me. Back on board he goes. It's safely on board now, ready for another battle. The battle has stood against evil. Now the performance man, his job here at the Red Deer Air Force is complete.
We're talking to Captain Rich Lancaster with the F-18 from the Canadian Armed Forces. Rich, can you tell us how long you've been with the Canadian Armed Forces?
Well, I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1979, so I've been with them 10 years now, and I'm presently flying with 410 Squadron in Cold Lake, and we train all the students on the F-18, so all new F-18 pilots go through our squadron to learn how to fly the F-18.
How long does it take from training to in hours and say length of time to get into one of these?
Well, once a student will come out of Moose Jaw after doing a year on the Tudor, which is what the snowbirds fly, he comes to Cold Lake and flies for 6 months on the CF5, and then he comes to us for another 6 months, and he'll get approximately 68 hours of flying time, about 40 hours of simulator training, and about 200 hours of ground school training.
Roughly what speeds do these do? Let's say we'll compare cruise and also slow flight to whatever your maneuver speed is.
Well, for those at the air show today, you see that the airplane in slow flight will travel about 100 knots, which is just over 100 miles an hour. And at altitude, it will do twice the speed of sound, so you're looking at about 1,400 miles an hour for the F-18.
What would something like this weigh?
This actual airplane here is about 32,000 pounds, but the gross weight with all the fuel tanks, and if we happen to load weapons on board, can go right up to 56,000 pounds.
How many does the Canadian Armed Forces have?
We presently have about 136 F-18s, and we've got in Cold Lake probably around 60 or 65 F-18s there.
How many pilots in the Canadian Armed Forces in Canada are at these local air shows?
Well, there's myself that comes down being the demonstration pilot, and I always bring a backup airplane, so I have one of the other squadron pilots fly the airplane down. I do the air show for 1 year, and next year they'll select another pilot from the squadron to do the same thing I'm doing.
During the air show maneuvers, are you on computer or is it all hands-on?
No, I'm flying the airplane, and basically I tell the airplane what I want it to do, but because it's fly-by-wire, all my inputs go through a computer, and it positions all the flight controls at the optimum angles to give me the best performance I can, but I am still actually flying the airplane. If I let go of the stick, it's going to go down.
Okay, today, the first day of the Red Deer Air Show, and because of the weather the way it is, you have different maneuvers, I understand. Could you explain your bad weather maneuver and also your good weather maneuver?
Okay, coming to most of the shows, you can never count on what the weather's going to do. So I have two shows, one called the Good Weather Show or the High Show, which I need a 5,000-foot ceiling from ground level and at least 3 nautical miles visibility. And for the Low Show, I need 1,500-foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. So today we're hovering around 2,000, 2,500 feet, but we had big gaps in the cloud, but unfortunately the clouds didn't agree with the timing for my show, so I had to do the Low Show today. And the High Show is much more spectacular because of the vertical maneuver I'm doing with the show.
We're going to see that tomorrow. I understand the weather's supposed to be good tomorrow, so we'll probably see that.
Well, the weatherman has promised me some good weather, so hopefully I'll be able to do the High Show tomorrow for the people that come out to see the air show.
Good. Well, we appreciate the interview, and thanks very much, Rich. Talking to Dave Cameron of the Canadian Armed Forces. Dave, could you tell us the type of aircraft that you're flying today?
Sure, it's a T-33, better known as a T-bird, and it's basically used now as we simulate enemy forces for the F-18s and the F-5s in Cold Lake to do their training. And originally the T-bird was used as a pilot trainer back with the RCAF out of places like Winnipeg and I think Penhold, actually. They might have had some here. Don't quote me on that. My history isn't that good. And then the plane was used as a fighter trainer for for students going on the basic fighter pilot course, and then now it's evolved to used as utility birding in Cold Lake. We use it as simulating enemy forces, and they also have planes in North Bay and Comox doing the same thing throughout Canada. And we work with the Americans in NORAD, and we go from we cover the west sector from San Diego north to Alaska, and work with the Americans on a sort of a trade-off sort of thing.
Is this your first air show activity, or do you perform for all over Canada, or is it just in the West?
Basically, I do the west sector. Mostly with the T-Bird, we do the smaller shows, the Red Deer. I did Moose Jaw and Cold Lake and a couple other the smaller shows around Alberta. And we leave the bigger air shows. They don't need the T-Bird and stuff. It's an older aircraft and stuff. So the Snowbirds and the F-18 are the highlights, and so we just do mostly the smaller shows. And it's just now starting to come back into the air shows. We're getting around, more units are giving planes to do the air shows sort of thing. It's getting back to that where it used to be probably 5 years ago they did the same thing.
What type of maneuvers do you do on these air shows?
Basically, I'm limited because I'm not an actual tasked air show pilot for all the air shows in Canada. We kind of represent the unit, and all I'll be doing is high-speed passes, a high speed with the top-side view of the plane at about 450 knots plus, equating that's about 500 miles an hour, a little over that, and then back, and then a level 360-degree turn, pulling 6 to 7 G throughout, and then come back for a vertical climb to approximately 6,000 to 7,000 feet, depending on the weather and the speed I have going into the maneuver. And then around for a closed pattern, which is a general maneuver that we use flying every day, which is just a setup for landing sort of thing.
What speeds do you attain in, say, your high-speed passes and the low speed you can do on your low speed?
High speed, it's usually, depending on the temperature and whatnot, what you can get out of the plane, you're looking at 450 knots would be a general speed, maybe a bit faster on a colder day. And on the 360-degree turn, I enter at about 330 knots and come out about 300 knots, losing a bit of airspeed through the turn. And on the slow speed, if I do it, it would be you're down about 115 knots.
What special training is required for this?
Basically, for the air show, it's not really special training. All it is you're selected within your unit, and then you work out your own show, and it's approved by someone higher up down in Winnipeg or Ottawa. And basically you just practice your show before you get onto the air show circuit, and then go from there.
Are you assigned to this particular aircraft, or do you fly others as well?
We, as in type, or this actual number of this aircraft? I only fly the T-Bird, the T-33 right now. And for the last 2 years I've been flying it. And in Cold Lake we have 12 jets and we have 8 pilots about. And so we just, whatever jet's serviceable and ready to go, we take.
We're talking to Al Peach at the Red Deer Air Show. Al, as one of the aerobatic pilots, could you tell us a little about how you got involved in aerobatics?
Well, I started out in my hometown of Minot, North Dakota in 1948. The Cole Brothers Air Show came to town, and I flew one of the acts in the air show, and that kind of got me started at it. I was hit and miss on and off until I built the airplane that I fly now. And then it's been every weekend, all summer, every year. So that's about the way it's evolved.
How long prior to the aerobatics have you been at flying?
I started when I was 13 years old, soloed when I was 14. Then they told me to go home and grow up when they found out how old I was. And I've been flying ever since, pretty much.
And you plan on continuing with your aerobatics, or you're going into another type of flying?
Well, I do other types of flying too, Jim. We have a flying service, my sons and I. And been in that since, well, I guess 48 was the first year I started crop spraying. So been in that forever. And we do aircraft sales, maintenance, student work. We have a school. We do air ambulance work and charter work. Operate about 20 airplanes.
What type of aircraft do you use for aerobatics? Is it one specific type, or do you have numerous types that you can use?
No, I use the Starduster 2, which is in the background here at the present time. Probably have a picture of it on the screen at this time, but it's an airplane that built in 1966. Started in November and finished it on, flew it May 15, 67, so it was 5.5 months.
Is there an advantage to having a biplane over a monoplane for aerobatics?
Oh, I think for air shows it probably is because of the nostalgia and all the things that go with it. Plus it's a pretty strong airplane, and biplanes are real stout. They don't come apart, hopefully.
Is this your first Red Deer Air Show, or have you been here before?
This is the first show at Red Deer. I've been here before. I was here at the World Aerobatics when you had them here. But this is the first air show here, and I've been looking forward to it and really appreciate being here.
I understand Kent, your son, is also involved in the aerobatic show that's going on today. Could you tell us what performance he's going to do in it?
He has, he'll be flying about 4 times. He flies his Starduster 2 in a dual act with me, and then he will fly a dead stick act that is, call it dead stick because the prop is stopped, and he flies an aerobatic routine, climbs up to about 6,000 feet, comes down on a spin to about 4,000, then starts doing aerobatics at that point. And he does a total routine and pulls up right in the same place that he started out from, and he's not missed yet. Probably, we'll never know. We'll see today how it goes.
Good. And what's your performance going to be?
I have a solo and a dual act in the show, and then also fly around the jumpers. And on Kent, he has another act that is a surprise act that he doesn't tell anybody about because I don't think he knows for sure what he's going to do on it. But that'll be my acts, and the show will be the dual act, the solo act, and an inverted ribbon pickup, which the 2 people hold the pole on each side about 40 feet apart. It's like having a hangar door open and fly through it upside down. That's about what it amounts to.
Could you tell us, Al and Kent, how long is it since you've started flying together?
Well, this is our 3rd show that we flew the formation act that Kent and I have flown it. My son Warren and I have been doing it for about 8 years. But he's over in Manchester, England, flying for American Transair. So Kent and I are doing it this weekend, and it was in Lac La Ronge about 4 weeks ago. It was our first one. So we've got a few rough edges to get ironed out yet, but it's going pretty good. It's fun following him around.
It looked good. And Kent, what do you do for a full-time job?
My full-time job is an airline pilot for Northwest Airlines, and also when I'm home not flying air shows, I'm hanging around the hangar trying to help out around there, but I'm more of a nuisance than anything, I think.
That's where you get your practice as aerobatics, is during the airlines.
Yeah, that's right. I try to give a real smooth ride. I hope nobody knows they're upside down. No, I don't do any of that. I try to keep it smooth.
Yeah, so every landing is an aerobatical maneuver, is it?
Yeah, I try to make it smooth so you don't know they're on, but sometimes it doesn't work.
It's going to be exciting, folks. And this is not an easy stunt. Not to be tried at home. Okay, now the interstate is coming up behind that Corvette. Eddie the Grip Green is on the hood. Danny Clisham's at the wheel. The cameraman is filming the whole thing so you'll be able to watch it on TV. Here we come now. The interstate cadet throttled back to about 60 miles an hour. Not quite on the stall speed. Eddie the Grip Green with his arm raised, signaling to Al Beach, and he's not quite reaching that rope ladder. Al is just a tiny bit high. Al has to lower the airplane and swing it in. Eddie the Grip Green has a firm hold on that rope ladder, and give him a big wave. A car to play transfer on the first try with Eddie the Grip Green. Danny Clisham driving, and Al Beach doing the flying. Folks, I didn't think that they would get there on the first go-around. Now, I was out driving to the airport this morning. Eddie can run pretty fast. Give him a wave, folks. He is the fastest jogger in the world. Look at that man go. He's just running. Boy, what great exercise. 60 miles an hour, and he's just jogging along in his style.
We're talking to Al Peach and his son Kent, and also Ed Green. Al, that was fantastic maneuvering you did on your aerobatics today. Could you tell us something about it?
Well, I'd like to start it out, Jim, with saying how much we've really appreciated being in Red Deer. The folks here are just outstanding. They're great people. And the maneuvers go through are some of them conventional loop and roll maneuvers, some are backing up tail slides, getting the airplane going backwards, some are tumbling outside. When we say outside, it means it's all negative G's or going against the belt. The maneuvers, some of them that we're doing are pulling as much as 8 times your weight, pushing, hanging in the belt as much as 4 times your weight. So it's a pretty good tumble out there.
Kent, how does it feel following the old pro?
Well, it's hard shoes to step into, but I keep trying to catch up to him. I don't think I'll make it.
He'll make it. He's there.
And where are you off to now?
Off to Victoria. We'll be leaving just in a few minutes and heading out across the mountains into the sunset. So we'll be going to Victoria. And Eddie here is from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he's going to get on an airline, go the other direction. He goes back home. And he's the gentleman that you saw when you was sitting in the car going up the rope ladder, so up to the airplane.
And Eddie is just the man I want to talk to. I can't see anybody leaving a perfectly serviceable vehicle to climb a ladder to get into an airplane.
Well, sometimes different people do different things, and I chose to be a stuntman and do some groundwork, and I found out there's less competition than being a pilot. So, you know, I do the car-to-plane transfer, and we do a car-top landing where we land a airplane on top of a pickup going down the runway, and I'm also a wing walker, so that keeps me busy.
And what do you do for a full-time job?
I work for Ford Motor Company back in Detroit, Michigan.
And you do this every season during air show time?
It's seasonal. We do it just through the summer months. Once in a while we'll have a show down in Florida or Georgia or something like that in the winter months, which is nice because it gets us out of that snow belt.
So Al calls you whenever he needs you?
Right. We keep him on standby all the time. When we need him, we holler at him.
How was the service on board after entering with the ladder?
Well, that's one of my little sayings is Al Peach's flying service and airlines, but he has a rotten boarding procedure. But he's a great pilot, and it was fun working with him.
How was the price of the flight? Was it okay?
It was cheap. It was cheap.
Boarding that way, I expect. Well, all the three of you, I appreciate the interview, and lots of luck in your endeavors, and let's hope to see you back here next year.
Hope so. Really love to come back.
Good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes.
Coming out of the airplane at this time, ladies and gentlemen, would you give a big round of applause to the stuntman, Mr. Eddie Green. Shaking hands with the pilot, Mr. Al Peach. Across the top, weightlessness. Now on the 45-degree downline, watch as she comes diving in the airplane. Right about in here, watch for the double snap. All the way around once and twice the double snap on the 45-degree downline. Now setting up almost immediately for the 4-point hesitation roll. We'll watch for the nose to come up. There's one. He holds it.
We're talking to Joanne Osterode. Joanne, could you tell us what type of aircraft that you fly?
This is called a supernova. It's a form of hyperbike that's extra special with nitrous oxide injection.
What type of maneuvers do you do? Could you explain it to us?
Well, I try to show off the airplane as best as possible because it does knife edge flight very well. It also does point rolls and it flies upside down very well.
I understand that you hold a record in aerobatics. Could you tell us something about it?
Yeah, I set that record just a couple of weeks ago, the world record for consecutive outside loops. I stole the women's record of 58 years and the men's record also.
Isn't that something? Now, what's your future plans for air shows now? Where do you go from here?
Well, I'm going to keep flying air shows. I'm going to be continuing to travel this year up until the middle of November, and then I'll start again next March.
What do you do, take holidays from your work?
I take holidays and all my days off, and I plan just so I can, this is what I love to do.
What do you do for a living?
I fly for United Airlines the rest of the time. I'm a second officer on 727s. It's kind of like driving a fine luxury car during the week and a dirt bike on the weekends.
Well, Joan, thanks very much for the interview. And are you heading out today?
Later on this afternoon, right. We're heading down to Idaho first and then over towards Whidbey Island.
Thank you very much.
Work your way across the top, leading off all of your speed. Floating across the top, now the top line. You must push forward on that stick. Take discipline. You want outside loop, flying the Pepsi Special now, not complete. One maneuver after the other. A lot of grueling work. There comes takeoff to the right. Helping her to climb up just a little bit higher, bringing up a little bit more altitude. Now the night loop goes off, and the horsepowers goes back to almost 200. Recovering now the tough way to the upside down position.
This fine afternoon at the Red Deer Air Show, we're talking to Frank Ryder. Frank, could you tell us what type of aircraft it is that you do your aerobatics in?
Sure, Jim. I have a very special airplane. I'm flying the Midas Special here at the air show. It started out as a Royal Air Force trainer, actually. It was built in England in 1951. Now, to do the types of maneuvers you saw out here today, the really strenuous type things, I had to specially modify that airplane. I put a lot of extra horsepower on it, beefed it up quite a bit, did things like clip the wings, extend the ailerons, put heavier metal on the fuselage skins. Because when I'm doing some of these maneuvers that you saw today, like the pull-ups into the vertical roll-up and the torque roll, you're undergoing some G loads of 6.5 to 7 positive Gs. And with some of the maneuvers like the outside loop and the Lomshavak, you're looking at like minus 4.5 Gs. So it's quite a load on the airframe, and it took a lot of work to make a special plane out of it.
What are some of the places in North America that you perform your aerobatics?
Oh, I fly air shows all over the U.S. and Canada. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I come up into Canada, at least fly 3, 4, 5 shows a year anyway. So I kind of feel Canadian at times. I'm flying here this weekend. I'm going over to Kamloops on Wednesday and over to Abbotsford following weekend, and on down to Plainfield, Washington, and then over to Toronto.
If you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living that you can afford to come out and partake in these air shows?
Well, right now I fly the Midas Special. I fly air shows professionally as a living.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell us what some of the speeds are that in the performances?
Sure, my airplane, I'm working it up to about 220 miles an hour in certain maneuvers, but normally in the show I'm keeping it down to around 180 miles an hour. And on one of the maneuvers, I actually get to minus 60. That's where I fall backwards.
What are some of the G-forces that you, positive and negative?
Yeah, like I said, mentioned before, when I pull up like to the torque roll where I'm trying to maintain the speed and get the airplane vertical, I'll pull as high as 6.5 or 7 positive Gs. And on a couple of maneuvers where I'm headed straight downhill and I push to the outside or go to the inverted position, I'm pushing about 4.5 to 5 negative Gs.
Do you plan on continuing this type of occupation?
For a very long time, Jim. Very long time.
You must love your flying.
I love it. Nothing like it. As you saw, the people out here today at the air show really love it. I mean, we have a great bunch of aviators out here putting on the show. We're in the entertainment business. We try to make this wonderful for everyone. And we have a great time flying, and everybody enjoys it. You can't beat that.
To go through the 8-point hesitation roll. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the upside down position. 4 rank number 8, and the 8-point hesitation roll is complete. Now Frank rolls to the upside down position. Once again, as you can see, the aircraft continues to fly. Ready for the grueling Robo Pepper outside loop, pushing forward on the stick now. Straining against the safety belts and the shoulder harnesses across the top. Now a lot of courage to continue to push the stick forward. And recovering past the precise altitude from which he started. Holding the airplane now to the upside down environment. On the way up, let's watch for the roll back to the right side up position. As he comes back in, after taking up a little extra altitude, he'll be setting up for the torque roll. You'll see him roll on the way up, tail slide on the way down. Okay, the Kodak film in your cameras now. Get ready as Frank picks up a little extra altitude. He'll vertical roll the aircraft on the way up. Stop that vertical roll. Go into the tail slide. The pendulum effect will take over. You can see he's picked up just a little bit extra altitude. That is the safety margin and the buffer. As the airplane goes into the Lomshavak, tumbling nose over tail, once, twice, 2.5 times. And recovering as the blur now becomes a steady picture and the recovery takes place. sets up for the finale flyby. Back on the stick. Spotted flew the vertical roll. On the way up, one complete roll. Still rolling the airplane, number one, speed will go to 0. Shift into reverse, start backwards, disappear through the smoke. Still rolling, still rolling, still rolling the airplane. And recovering on the downline. The top way, in a negative G, upside down and bottom. Special thanks to Mr. David Lindsay, our Midas muffler owner here at Red Deer, for sponsoring Frank Ryder and the very dynamic and highly modified Super the Apple and Chipmunk. 75 miles an hour, the A-26 Invader from Airspray. Keep your eye on the airplane. The contract pilots who are hired to go out and fight the forest fires must re-qualify. In the spring, they load up the A-26s with water. They go up to a test range. The members of the government watch to see that each one of the pilots qualify. That they get the target load, whether it is water or slurry, directly on the fire area, as seconds and minutes are critical. Now, with fire smoldering, we'll watch and see if the A-26 from Airspray, the Invader, is able to come in and drop the water load directly over the smoke area. There's the speed to make the A-26 so great. Watch the Bombay doors.